The days following Jack's confrontation with Clara were marked by a haunting silence. The once warm home they had built together felt cold and empty. Jack stayed with a friend while he began preparing for the inevitable divorce. Clara, left alone in the house, grappled with the consequences of her actions. The guilt was unbearable, and every corner of the home served as a reminder of the life she had destroyed. She reached out to Jack daily, sending texts and leaving voicemails, begging for a chance to explain, to fix things, to make amends. "Please, Jack," one voicemail said, her voice breaking. "I'll do anything. I made a terrible mistake, but I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you." But Jack didn't respond. The betrayal had cut too deep, and he wasn't ready to face her pleas. Instead, he focused on moving forward. The divorce proceedings were swift. Jack's lawyer filed on grounds of infidelity, and with the evidence Jack had collected, there was little room for dispute. Clara initially resisted, pleading for counseling and reconciliation, but she eventually realized that Jack's decision was final. "I'll never forgive myself for this," Clara said during one of their meetings with the lawyers. Her voice was hollow, her eyes red from crying. Jack didn't reply. He couldn't. The pain of her betrayal was still too fresh, and any words he might have spoken would have only reopened the wound. Mr. Avery's involvement in the affair didn't remain a secret for long. Jack's confrontation at the office had been overheard by a few co-workers, and rumors spread quickly. Within weeks, the scandal had reached upper management, and Mr. Avery was asked to step down. The professional fallout was significant, and Mr. Avery's reputation in the industry was irreparably damaged. As for Clara, she found herself ostracized by their social circle. Friends who had once admired her now avoided her, and the shame of her actions followed her everywhere. She moved to a small apartment on the outskirts of town, far from the life she had once known. Jack, meanwhile, focused on rebuilding his life. He poured himself into his work, his friendships, and his hobbies, rediscovering parts of himself that had been lost in the chaos of his marriage. He sought therapy to process the betrayal, finding solace in the guidance of a compassionate counselor. "You're stronger than you think," the counselor told him during one session. "This is a chapter in your life, not the whole story. There's so much more ahead of you." Those words stayed with Jack, becoming a beacon of hope as he navigated the difficult path of healing. Months turned into a year, and Jack began to find peace. He rekindled old friendships, traveled to places he'd always wanted to see, and even started dating again. While the scars of Clara's betrayal remained, they no longer defined him. He had grown stronger, wiser, and more resilient. One evening, as Jack sat on the porch of his new home, sipping a cup of tea and watching the sun set, he received an unexpected message from Clara. It was a short note, filled with remorse. Jack. I've spent the last year thinking about everything I did to you, to us. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know how deeply sorry I am. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I threw it away. I hope you found happiness again. Clara*. Jack read the message twice before setting his phone down. He didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. The affair that had once shattered Jack's world now felt like a distant memory, a painful chapter that had ultimately led him to a better place. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Jack smiled. The future was his, and he was finally free to embrace it. The days after the holiday party were filled with a strange sense of unease for Emily. She couldn't stop thinking about the young man in the Santa suit, his charm, his confidence, and most of all, the note he'd slipped into her hand. She had stuffed it into her clutch without looking at it, determined to put the entire encounter behind her. But late one night, while Mark was snoring softly beside her, curiosity got the better of her. Quietly, Emily slipped out of bed and retrieved her purse from the closet. She pulled out the note, her hands trembling as she unfolded it. Written in bold, confident handwriting were the words. Meet me at the town square gazebo tomorrow at 7 p.m. I'll be waiting. Santa? Emily's heart raced as she stared at the note. She knew she should crumple it up, throw it away, and forget the entire thing. But instead, she slipped it back into her purse, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The next day, Emily found herself distracted and jumpy, second-guessing her every decision. Mark, as usual, was preoccupied with work, barely noticing her unease. By the time 6:30 p.m. rolled around, Emily's resolve was faltering. She paced the living room, telling herself that she wasn't going to go. But as the clock ticked closer to 7, she grabbed her coat and walked out the door. The town square was quiet, the festive decorations twinkling softly in the evening light. Emily's breath fogged the air as she approached the gazebo, her heart pounding in her chest. He was there, leaning casually against one of the pillars, his Santa hat cocked at a jaunty angle. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said, his grin lighting up his face. "Neither was I," Emily admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Ryan, she learned his name that night, was magnetic in a way that Emily found impossible to resist. They talked for what felt like hours, their conversation flowing effortlessly. Ryan's flirtation was bold but never overbearing, and Emily felt a spark of excitement she hadn't experienced in years. "You deserve to feel alive," he said at one point, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Emily knew she should leave, but when Ryan leaned in, his intentions clear, she didn't pull away. His kiss was electrifying, and for a brief moment, the world around her disappeared. When they finally broke apart, Emily's mind was a whirlwind of guilt and exhilaration. "I should go," she said, stepping back. Ryan nodded, his smile never wavering. "I'll see you around," he said, his voice full of confidence. Emily returned home to find Mark still at his desk, typing away on his laptop. He barely glanced up when she walked in, mumbling something about a deadline. Emily's guilt hit her like a tidal wave, but she pushed it down, telling herself it had been a one-time lapse in judgment. But it wasn't. Over the next few weeks, Ryan found ways to see her. A chance meeting at the coffee shop, a lingering look at the gym, a casual text that sent her heart racing. Each encounter pulled Emily deeper into a web of secrecy and desire. "You're playing with fire," her best friend Sarah said when Emily confided in her one afternoon. "If Mark finds out." "He won't," Emily said quickly, though her voice lacked conviction. "I've got everything under control." But control was slipping through her fingers. One evening, while Mark was working late, Ryan convinced her to meet him at a small motel on the outskirts of town. Emily hesitated, knowing she was crossing a line she could never uncross. But the thrill of the forbidden was too strong to resist. The motel room was dimly lit, the air thick with tension. Ryan's confidence was intoxicating, and Emily found herself giving in to him completely. The passion was unlike anything she'd experienced before, leaving her breathless and conflicted. As she dressed to leave, Ryan leaned against the doorframe, watching her with a smirk. "You're incredible," he said. "Don't forget that." Emily forced a smile, her emotions a tangled mess. She knew what she was doing was wrong, but she couldn't bring herself to stop. Back at home, Mark was waiting for her, his expression a mix of concern and annoyance. "Where have you been?" he asked, his voice sharper than usual. Emily froze, her mind racing for an excuse. "Just out with Sarah," she said quickly. "We lost track of time." Mark frowned but didn't press the issue. "You've been distant lately," he said. "Is everything okay?" "Of course," Emily said, forcing a laugh. "I've just been busy, that's all." But as Mark returned to his laptop, Emily felt the weight of her lies pressing down on her. She knew she was playing a dangerous game, and it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. The affair between Emily and Ryan deepened as winter settled over the town. Emily became adept at weaving lies, convincing Mark that her increasing absences were due to errands, gym classes, or visits with Sarah. Each encounter with Ryan was thrilling but left her feeling more conflicted than before. She tried to ignore the growing weight of her guilt, but it became harder to suppress as the weeks went on. Ryan, however, seemed to revel in their secret relationship. He would text Emily throughout the day, his messages a mix of flirtation and bold propositions. "Thinking about you in that red dress. When can I see you again?" Emily's stomach fluttered every time her phone buzzed. But as much as Ryan's attention excited her, it also made her uneasy. He was growing bolder, and the risk of discovery felt closer than ever. One afternoon, Emily stopped by the coffee shop where she and Ryan sometimes met. As she sipped her latte, she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned, her heart sinking when she saw her neighbor, Linda, standing behind her. "Emily. Fancy seeing you here," Linda said, her tone cheerful but her eyes sharp. "Hi, Linda," Emily replied, forcing a smile. "Just grabbing a coffee before running errands." Linda's gaze flicked to the empty chair across from Emily. "Meeting someone?" "No, just taking a quick break," Emily said quickly, hoping her neighbor wouldn't notice the second cup on the table. Linda lingered for a moment longer before nodding. "Well, I'll see you around. Say hi to Mark for me." Emily exhaled in relief as Linda left, but the encounter left her shaken. She couldn't afford any more close calls. Despite her unease, Emily continued to see Ryan. Their encounters grew riskier as they met in public places, trusting that no one would recognize them. One evening, they shared a heated moment in the back of Ryan's car, parked in a secluded area of the town park. As they parted ways, Ryan grabbed her hand, his expression serious. "You're amazing, Emily," he said. "I don't want this to end." Emily's heart ached at his words. She knew their relationship couldn't last, but the thought of ending it left her feeling hollow. At home, Mark began noticing changes in Emily's behavior. She was more distant, her phone always within reach, and her excuses for leaving the house felt rehearsed. "You've been out a lot lately," he said one evening as they sat on the couch. "Is everything okay?" Emily forced a laugh. "Of course. Just busy with holiday prep and catching up with friends." Mark nodded, but his concern lingered. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The tension escalated when Mark's colleague, Tom, casually mentioned seeing Emily at the park one evening. "I thought I saw Emily's car parked near the gazebo the other night," Tom said during a work meeting. "Did she take the kids for a walk?" Mark frowned. "No, she didn't mention going to the park." Tom shrugged. "Maybe I was mistaken." The comment gnawed at Mark. That night, he waited until Emily was asleep before scrolling through her phone. To his frustration, it was locked. His suspicion grew, and he resolved to keep a closer eye on her. Meanwhile, Ryan began pushing the boundaries of their affair. He showed up unannounced at Emily's gym, catching her off guard as she exited a class. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, glancing around nervously. "I wanted to see you," Ryan said, his grin unrepentant. "You've been avoiding me." Emily shook her head. "This is too risky. You can't just show up like this." "Relax," Ryan said, leaning in closer. "No one's paying attention." But Emily knew he was wrong. She could feel the curious eyes of other gym-goers, and the weight of their stares made her stomach churn. The turning point came when Mark decided to surprise Emily at the coffee shop one afternoon. He'd taken the afternoon off work, hoping to spend some quality time with her. As he approached the shop, he froze, his heart sinking as he saw Emily sitting with Ryan, their heads close together. Mark stepped back, his mind racing. He didn't confront them then, choosing instead to watch from a distance. Emily's laughter, the way she touched Ryan's arm, it all confirmed what he had been dreading. When Emily returned home that evening, Mark was waiting for her. His expression was calm, but his eyes burned with intensity. "How was your day?" he asked, his voice even. Emily hesitated, sensing something was off. "Fine. Just the usual errands." Mark nodded slowly. "Did you happen to run into anyone while you were out?" Emily's stomach dropped. She forced a smile, shaking her head. "No, why?" Mark's gaze didn't waver. "Just wondering." As Emily turned away, Mark's resolve hardened. He knew he needed more proof before confronting her, but the betrayal was undeniable. The affair was no longer just a suspicion, it was a ticking time bomb. The tension in Emily and Mark's home was palpable. Mark's suspicions had grown into certainty, though he kept his discoveries to himself. Emily, unaware that her husband was piecing things together, continued her secret affair with Ryan. But the thrill that had once defined their relationship was now laced with paranoia and unease. Ryan's boldness escalated. He started sending Emily risky messages during the day, asking to meet in places where they could be easily seen. "Let's meet at the park after your gym class." "I'll bring coffee," one text read. Emily hesitated before responding. "It's too risky. Mark's been acting strange. We need to be careful." Ryan's reply came almost instantly, "He doesn't know anything. Trust me, we're fine." But Emily's nerves were fraying. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. Mark decided it was time to act. One evening, while Emily was out, he installed a tracking app on her phone. He hated resorting to such measures, but he needed the truth. The app provided him with real-time updates on her location, and within days, he had confirmation of her meetings with Ryan. Mark's anger simmered as he watched the evidence pile up. But he didn't confront Emily yet. He wanted her to admit the truth on her own. One evening, Emily and Ryan met at a quiet bar on the edge of town. Emily's anxiety was palpable as she sipped her drink, glancing around nervously. "You're tense," Ryan said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "What's wrong?" "Mark knows something," Emily admitted. "He's been asking questions, and I think he's watching me." Ryan shrugged, his confidence unshaken. "Let him watch. He can't prove anything." Emily pulled her hand away. "This isn't a game, Ryan. If he finds out..." Ryan leaned back, his expression turning serious. "Do you want to end this?" Emily's heart ached at the thought. Despite everything, she couldn't deny the connection she felt with Ryan. But the risk was becoming unbearable. "I don't know," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The next day, Mark decided to test Emily. He casually mentioned that he would be working late, then parked his car a few blocks away and waited. As expected, Emily left the house shortly after. Mark followed her, his heart pounding as he watched her drive to a familiar location, the motel where she and Ryan often met. Mark's hands trembled as he took photos of her car parked outside. He waited for over an hour before Emily emerged, her hair slightly disheveled and a distant look in her eyes. She drove home without noticing Mark tailing her. That night, Mark stayed silent, pretending everything was normal. But inside, he was seething. Ryan's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He started showing up at places where Emily hadn't invited him, her gym, the coffee shop, even the grocery store. Emily's discomfort grew, but Ryan dismissed her concerns. "I just want to see you," he said with a grin. "Is that so bad?" Emily's patience wore thin. "You're going to get us caught," she said. "You need to back off." Ryan's smile faded, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. "I thought we were in this together," he said. "Maybe I was wrong." Emily's stomach twisted at his words. She felt trapped between her loyalty to Mark and her turbulent relationship with Ryan. The breaking point came when Mark confronted Emily after dinner. He placed his phone on the table and played a video, footage from the motel parking lot, showing Emily entering and leaving with Ryan. Emily's face went pale. "Mark, I can explain." "Don't," Mark said, his voice cold. "I've seen enough." "How long has this been going on?" Emily's eyes filled with tears. "It was a mistake," she whispered. "I didn't mean for it to happen." "A mistake?" Mark said, his voice rising. "You don't accidentally meet someone at a motel, Emily. You don't accidentally lie to your husband." Emily broke down, sobbing. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." Mark shook his head, his expression a mix of anger and heartbreak. "It's too late for that." Emily moved into the guest room that night, her cries echoing through the house. Mark stayed up late, staring at the photos and videos he had collected, wondering how their marriage had come to this. The next morning, Mark made a decision. He would file for divorce, but first, he wanted to confront Ryan. The young man had to face the consequences of his actions, just as Emily would. The confrontation Mark had been dreading was inevitable. Armed with undeniable evidence of the affair, he resolved to confront Ryan directly. The betrayal had already shattered his trust in Emily, but facing the man who had disrupted their marriage was the final step toward closure. Mark found Ryan at the gym where Emily had said she often met her friends. Ryan was lifting weights, his carefree demeanor a stark contrast to the turmoil he had caused. Mark approached him, his steps heavy with determination. "Ryan," Mark said, his voice low and firm. Ryan turned, his expression shifting from surprise to unease. "Hey, Mark, right? You know exactly who I am," Mark replied, his fists clenched at his sides. "I know about you and Emily. And I know everything you've been doing behind my back." Ryan's smirk faltered, replaced by a defensive scowl. "Look, man, it's not what you think." "Don't," Mark snapped. "Don't insult me by pretending there's some excuse for what you've done. You destroyed my marriage, my family. Was it worth it?" Ryan hesitated, then shrugged. "I didn't force her into anything. If your marriage was so great, she wouldn't have come to me." Mark's restraint broke. He grabbed Ryan by the collar, his voice shaking with rage. "Stay away from her. Stay away from my family. If I ever see you near her again, you'll regret it." Ryan raised his hands in mock surrender. "Fine. Whatever. She's not worth the trouble anyway." Mark released him, disgusted, and walked away, his heart pounding. He had done what he needed to, but the confrontation left him feeling hollow. At home, Emily was packing a suitcase. She knew there was no saving their marriage now. When Mark walked in, she turned to face him, her eyes red from crying. "I'm leaving," she said softly. "I think it's for the best." Mark nodded, his expression unreadable. "It is." "I'm so sorry, Mark," Emily said, her voice trembling. "I never meant to hurt you." "But you did," Mark replied, his voice heavy. "And there's no coming back from this." Emily's tears fell freely as she zipped her suitcase and walked to the door. She paused, looking back at him one last time. "I hope you find someone who makes you happy," she said. Mark didn't respond. He watched as she walked out, the door closing behind her with a finality that echoed through the house. In the weeks that followed, Mark began rebuilding his life. He filed for divorce, the process straightforward thanks to the evidence he had gathered. He threw himself into work and leaned on his friends for support. Slowly but surely, he started to find peace. Emily, on the other hand, struggled to adjust to her new reality. Ryan's interest in her had faded as quickly as it had ignited, leaving her to face the consequences of her choices alone. She moved into a small apartment and started therapy, determined to understand what had led her down such a destructive path. Months later, Mark received a letter from Emily. It was short but heartfelt. Mark. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know how deeply sorry I am for everything I've done. Losing you has been the hardest thing I've ever experienced, and I'll regret my actions for the rest of my life. I hope you found happiness again. You deserve it. Emily *. Mark read the letter twice before setting it aside. He didn't respond. Instead, he took a deep breath and stepped outside, the spring a reminder that life continued to move forward. As time passed, Mark found himself smiling more often. He began dating again, cautiously opening his heart to the possibility of new love. The pain of Emily's betrayal never fully disappeared, but it became a distant memory, a chapter in his life that had taught him resilience and strength. In the end, Mark emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace a future free from the shadows of his past.